When Dr. Manhattan materializes above Cadia, even the Chaos Gods recoil in confusion, because here stands a being who cannot be corrupted, cannot be killed, and exists in all timelines simultaneously, making him more powerful than anything they had ever seen before. But if Manhattan possesses godlike power that dwarfs even the mightiest gods, will he choose to do absolutely nothing while letting trillions suffer and die? The void above Cadia split open with a flash of blue light that turned the black sky into day. Billions of Imperial citizens looked up from their trenches and bunkers, pausing in their endless war against the forces of chaos. The light was not red like the eye of terror that stared down at them every night. It was not green like the warp storms that brought daemons screaming into reality. It was blue, a pure electric blue that hurt the eyes to look at directly. Something stepped through the light. A figure, naked and glowing, his skin the color of deep ocean water. He floated above the battlefield where millions of soldiers had died over thousands of years. His eyes held no emotion, no fear, no anger. He simply existed, watching everything with the calm interest of someone studying insects under glass. The battle stopped. Chaos Space Marines, twisted giants in corrupted armor, froze mid-charge. Their bolt guns fell silent. Imperial guardsmen, exhausted men and women who had fought for months without rest, lowered their last guns and stared upward. Even the daemons, creatures of pure madness and hate, paused their slaughter. They felt something wrong in the air, something that should not exist. Dr. Manhattan hung in the sky, his blue form casting strange shadows across the torn landscape. He saw everything at once. He watched the soldier below him die from a chaos blade through his chest. He watched that same soldier being born 40 years earlier on a peaceful farming world. He watched Cadia itself explode into fragments, its pieces scattering across the void. All of these moments existed together in his mind, happening at the same time. Time meant nothing to him. Past and future were the same as the present. He had seen the beginning of this universe and its end. He had watched stars be born and die. He had observed countless civilizations rise and fall. And now he stood above Cadia, seeing its entire history spread before him like a book with all its pages open at once. On the command bridge of his flagship, Abaddon the Despoiler felt something he had not experienced in 10,000 years. Confusion. The War Master of Chaos had broken against Cadia 12 times before. He had led armies of traitor space marines, hordes of daemons, and fleets of corrupted warships against this fortress world. Each time he had failed, but this 13th crusade would be different. Victory was certain. The planet would fall, and yet now this blue figure appeared, and Abaddon did not know what it meant. He gripped his ancient sword, Drachnien, a weapon that housed a daemon older than the Imperium itself. The blade whispered to him in languages that drove mortal men insane. It promised him that the blue figure was an enemy, a threat to chaos, something that must be destroyed. Abaddon trusted the sword. It had never been wrong before. The War Master commanded his fleet to fire. A dozen chaos warships turned their weapons toward the floating figure. Massive cannons that could crack continents roared to life. Missiles carrying plague and madness streaked through the void. Warp lightning, drawn from the raw stuff of hell itself, lanced across space. Dr. Manhattan watched the attack approach. He saw each shell, each missile, each bolt of corrupted energy. He calculated their trajectories, their explosive yields, their molecular structures. In the microsecond, before they struck him, he understood everything about them. Then, they hit. The explosions bloomed across the sky like deadly flowers. Fire hot enough to melt. Adamantium washed over Manhattan's blue form. Poison gases that could kill 1,000,000 men in seconds surrounded him. Warp energies that could tear souls from bodies wrapped around him like hungry serpents. When the fire cleared, Manhattan remained unchanged. Not a mark on his glowing skin, not a flicker in his calm expression. He raised one hand and pointed at the lead Chaos warship, a massive vessel 5 miles long, covered in spikes and screaming faces. The warship came apart, not from an explosion, not from fire or weapons. It simply separated into its component atoms. Millions of tons of corrupted metal, thousands of traitor space marines, dozens of bound daemons, all reduced to drifting clouds of molecules. Manhattan studied the patterns of decay, the way chaos corruption existed at a subatomic level. Interesting. Then, with a thought, he reversed the process. The atoms came back together. The warship rebuilt itself in seconds, appearing exactly as it had been. The traitor Marines found themselves alive again, standing at the same positions they had occupied before. The daemons remained trapped inside the ship's corrupted hull, their eternal screaming resuming as if nothing had happened. Abaddon stared at his tactical displays. His ship had been destroyed and recreated in the span of a heartbeat. His weapons had done nothing. His daemons whispered in fear, an emotion they should not be capable of feeling. The blue figure had not attacked out of anger or defense. He had killed and resurrected an entire warship out of simple curiosity. On Cadia's surface, Inquisitor Lord Kylar watched through his command bunker's viewing screen. He had served the Emperor for 200 years, extended by rejuvenation treatments and augmented organs. He had faced daemons and heretics. He had stood in the presence of Space Marine chapter masters and living saints. He had never seen anything like this. He gathered his Grey Knights, Space Marines whose sole purpose was fighting, daemons and chaos. Their armor was silver, blessed by the Emperor himself. Their weapons crackled with holy power. They were the Imperium's ultimate weapon against the forces of the warp. Kylar led them to the highest point of the fortress, where the blue figure had descended to stand upon the ancient walls. Manhattan looked at them with eyes that held the light of distant stars. He saw these warriors in all their timelines. He watched them train as children, saw them survive brutal surgeries, witnessed their deaths decades in the future. One would die in 3 years fighting plague marines on a daemon world. Another would live for centuries before falling in battle against a greater daemon. Their fates were already written, already happening, already done. Kylar stepped forward, his force sword drawn. The blade hummed with psychic energy that could cut through tank armor and daemon flesh alike. He spoke with the authority of the Inquisition, the organization that answered only to the Emperor himself. Identify yourself, anomaly. By the authority of the God Emperor of mankind, you will submit to examination and questioning. You will explain your nature and your purpose. Resistance will be met with lethal force. Manhattan tilted his head slightly, studying the Inquisitor. He saw Kylar's entire life in an instant. The orphan child, recruited by the Inquisition. The years of brutal training. The first daemon he killed. The thousands of heretics he executed. The doubts he buried deep inside. The questions about whether the Emperor's way was truly right. Manhattan saw it all. I am beyond your Emperor's light, Manhattan said, his voice carrying across the battlefield without needing amplification. I exist in dimensions your species cannot perceive. Your Imperium will fall in 3,847 years. This conversation is simultaneously our first and last meeting. Before Kylar could respond, he felt reality shift. The world blurred around him. When his vision cleared, he stood on Terra, the throne world of humanity. But something was wrong. The sky was dark with ash. The Imperial Palace lay in ruins. Billions of corpses filled the streets. The Emperor's light had gone out. Humanity had fallen. Kylar screamed. He ran through the ruins, seeing the end of everything he had fought for. He aged as he ran, his augmented body failing, his 200 years catching up with him all at once. His hair turned white, his skin wrinkled and sagged. His organs began to fail. He collapsed in the ashes of Terra, dying alone in the ruins of mankind's greatest achievement. Then he was back on Cadia's walls. His Grey Knights caught him as he fell to his knees. He looked down at his hands. They were old now, the skin spotted and thin. His face in his armor's reflection showed a man 40 years older than he had been moments before. He had lived decades in seconds, forced to witness humanity's inevitable doom. Manhattan watched the Inquisitor's reaction without emotion. You asked me to identify myself. Now you understand. I am Dr. Manhattan. I see all of time as you see distance. What you call future has already happened from my perspective. Your struggle is meaningless, because I have already witnessed its conclusion. The Grey Knights raised their weapons, but Kylar held up a trembling hand to stop them. He understood now. This being could not be threatened, could not be fought, could not be reasoned with in any way that mattered. It existed outside the rules that governed the Imperium, outside even the rules of the Chaos Gods. Manhattan turned his attention to the Eye of Terror. the massive wound in reality where the warp bled through into normal space. He detected patterns there, interesting interference in the quantum field. Entities claiming godhood resided within, beings of immense psychic power that fed on emotion and belief. He had encountered gods before in other universes. He had found them disappointing, limited by the worship of their followers. These chaos gods would be different, he sensed. They existed in a realm where physics worked differently, where thought and reality merged. He decided to investigate them, not as threats to defeat, but as phenomena to study and understand. Without warning, without explanation, Dr. Manhattan vanished. He did not fly away or teleport in a flash of light. He simply stopped existing in that location and began existing somewhere else. The blue glow faded from Cadia's sky. The battle resumed as if awakening from a dream. But everyone who had witnessed the blue god knew that something fundamental had changed. Something had arrived in their universe that did not care about their survival, their faith, or their endless war. And that terrified them more than any daemon ever could. Dr. Manhattan stepped into the eye of terror as easily as a man might step through a doorway. The boundary between reality and the warp meant nothing to him. He existed in both states simultaneously, his quantum consciousness unaffected by the impossible physics of the Imperium. Around him, the laws of nature screamed and died. Time flowed backward and forward at once. Space folded into shapes that could not exist in 3 dimensions. Colors that had no names burned in the void. Sounds that were also tastes echoed through dimensions that mortal minds could not comprehend. Manhattan observed it all with calm interest. He had traveled through stranger places. He had walked between atoms and visited the spaces between universes. The warp was chaotic, certainly, but chaos followed patterns if observed from the right perspective. He began analyzing those patterns, breaking down the fundamental structure of this realm that existed outside normal reality. He descended toward a planet that should not exist, a world floating in the warp itself without normal space around it. The plague planet, the garden of Nurgle, chaos, god of disease and decay. The atmosphere was thick with flies, billions of them forming clouds so dense they blocked out whatever passed for sunlight in this cursed realm. The ground was covered in corpses at various stages of rot, each one blooming with colorful fungi and crawling with maggots the size of human fingers. Plague Marines detected his arrival. These were Space Marines who had fallen to Nurgle's corruption, their bodies swollen with disease, their armor rusted and cracked, leaking pus from every joint. They carried weapons that fired clouds of plague, bullets infected with viruses that could kill millions. They saw the blue figure walking through their garden and opened fire. The plague bullets passed through Manhattan's body, leaving no mark. The virus clouds surrounded him but found nothing to infect. He had no cells for them to corrupt, no flesh for them to rot. He was pure energy held in human shape by nothing more than will and quantum probability. The Plague Marines fired again and again, unable to understand why their weapons failed. Manhattan stopped walking and looked at them. He saw their entire existence in an instant. They had once been loyal Space Marines, warriors of the Imperium. Then they had fallen to despair, to the belief that all struggle was pointless, that decay was the only truth. Nurgle had claimed them, filling the holes in their souls with false comfort and acceptance of entropy. Now, they were monsters, spreading disease wherever they went. He raised his hand. The Plague Marines came apart into their component atoms. Billions of molecules separated and hung in the air, organized by element. Carbon here, iron there, hydrogen forming clouds of gas. Even the chaos corruption that permeated their bodies was broken down into pure warp energy, visible as streams of sickly green light. Manhattan studied the patterns, understanding how chaos existed at a molecular level, how it changed matter at its most fundamental state. Then he put them back together. The atoms rushed back into place, reforming the Plague Marines exactly as they had been. They stood there, alive again, confused and horrified. They had experienced death and resurrection in the span of seconds. They had been reduced to nothing and remade. The experience broke something in their minds, and they fell to their knees, not in worship but in terror. A laugh echoed across the plague planet, deep and wet, like drowning in mud. The ground split open, and from the crack emerged something vast. Nurgle himself manifested, the chaos god of decay and despair. He was enormous, a mountain of rotting flesh, his body covered in boils that burst and reformed constantly. His face held 3 eyes that wept pus, and his smile showed teeth black with disease. Smaller daemons swarmed around him, creatures made of living, infection and concentrated misery. Manhattan looked at the Chaos God without fear or disgust. He simply observed, cataloging the entity's structure. Nurgle was not truly physical. He was a pattern of belief and emotion given form through the warp. Every time someone despaired, every time someone accepted death, every time someone found comfort in decay, they fed Nurgle power. The god was sustained by the collective unconscious of countless trillions across the galaxy. "Welcome to my garden, Blue One," Nurgle said, his voice bubbling through lungs filled with fluid. "You walk through my realm unafraid. You breathe my air without choking. You stand in my presence without falling to your knees. What manner of creature are you that cannot feel my grandfather's embrace?" Manhattan replied without emotion, "I am Dr. Manhattan. I am not a creature. I am a pattern of quantum probability, maintaining coherence through continuous observation of my own state. I cannot decay because I was never truly alive. I cannot despair because I exist in all timelines simultaneously and have already witnessed every possible outcome." Nurgle leaned closer, his massive form casting shadows that moved independently of any light source. "All things rot, Blue One. Even gods. Even the stars themselves will one day grow cold and die. Entropy claims everything in the end. I am entropy, given consciousness. I am the truth that all others deny." Manhattan considered this statement. "I have observed the heat death of 17 universes. Entropy is inevitable, but not decay. You are not entropy itself. You are simply patterns of belief given form through quantum fluctuations in the warp. You exist because conscious minds believe you exist. Remove the believers, and you cease." For the first time in eternities uncounted, Nurgle felt something like concern. This being understood what he was, saw through the facade of divine power to the mechanism underneath. Nurgle tried to spread his influence, to touch Manhattan's mind with thoughts of despair and acceptance. He pushed waves of psychic energy at the blue figure, attempting to show him the futility of struggle, the peace that came with surrender. Manhattan felt the attempts like someone might feel a gentle breeze. The psychic influence passed through him without effect. He had no soul in the traditional sense, no unconscious mind for chaos to corrupt. He was pure consciousness observing itself, a closed loop that nothing external could penetrate. Nurgle's power, which could break the minds of saints and drive heroes to madness, accomplished nothing. Manhattan turned away from Nurgle and walked deeper into the plague planet. The Chaos God watched him go, uncertain for the first time in his existence. Behind Manhattan, a greater daemon manifested, a massive creature of rot and disease, its body covered in open sores that wept acidic pus. It charged at the blue figure, intending to tear him apart with claws that could rend tank. Armor. Manhattan stopped and looked at the daemon. He reached out with his mind and grasped the fundamental structure of the creature's existence. Daemons were concentrations of warp energy, emotions and beliefs crystallized into physical form. This particular daemon was made from despair, from the accumulated anguish of billions who had given up hope. Manhattan saw the connections, the threads of psychic energy that sustained the daemon's existence. He began to pull those threads apart. The daemon screamed as it felt itself unraveling. Its body dissolved into streams of green energy that dispersed into the warp, but Manhattan did not destroy it completely. Instead, he studied the energy patterns, understanding how chaos functioned at its most basic level. Then he released the energy, allowing it to reform into a daemon once more. The creature manifested again, but something was wrong. It felt different. The despair that had defined its existence was gone. It looked at its clawed hands in confusion. It tried to feel the familiar comfort of decay, and found nothing. Manhattan had not destroyed the daemon. He had simply removed the emotional component that gave it purpose, creating a being of pure warp energy without any guiding intelligence or desire. Manhattan continued his journey through the realms of chaos. He visited the crystal labyrinth of Tziench, where reality shifted with every step and possible futures manifested as solid structures. The chaos god of change and manipulation tried to trap him in endless mazes, presenting him with false paths and illusions. But Manhattan existed in all times simultaneously. He saw every possible route through the labyrinth at once. He could not be lost because he had already arrived at every destination. Tsiench appeared as a mass of constantly shifting forms, never settling on a single shape. Sometimes he was a bird with rainbow feathers, sometimes a wizard with too many eyes, sometimes a flame that burned in colors that hurt to perceive. The Chaos God spoke in 9 voices at once, each saying something different. "You see all possible futures," Tsiench said with one voice. "Then you understand that I am inevitable," said another. "Every choice feeds me," claimed a third. "Every plan, every scheme, every attempt to change fate strengthens my existence," declared a fourth. Manhattan observed the entity without interest. "You are not inevitable. You are a parasite that feeds on the need for change and the desire to control outcomes. I have observed timelines where you do not exist. I have seen universes where conscious beings accept their fates without attempting to alter them. In those realities, entities like you cannot form." Tsiench laughed, but the sound held uncertainty. He tried to manipulate Manhattan, to plant ideas in his mind that would lead to desired outcomes. The chaos god of planning attempted to position Manhattan as a piece in his eternal games. But Manhattan could see all of Tsiench's schemes simultaneously, from their inception to their conclusion. He could observe every manipulation, every intended consequence, every backup plan. It was like watching someone try to play chess when all the pieces and all possible moves were visible at once. Manhattan turned and walked away, leaving Tsiench's realm behind. The Chaos God raged silently, frustrated by this being that could not be manipulated, could not be changed, could not be made to serve any purpose except his own. He descended into the brass citadel of Khorne, where skulls formed mountains and blood flowed in rivers. The chaos god of war and slaughter sat upon a throne made from the bones of countless warriors. Khorne was pure rage given form, a creature of endless violence who cared only for battle and bloodshed. Bloodthirsters, the mightiest of his daemons, charged at Manhattan with axes that could split reality itself. Manhattan stopped them with a thought. He reached into their minds, into the fundamental patterns that defined their existence, and removed their capacity for aggression. The bloodthirsters froze mid-charge, their weapons falling from suddenly limp hands. They looked around in confusion, unable to understand why they no longer wanted to kill. The rage that had been their entire existence vanished, leaving them as empty shells of warp energy with no purpose or direction. Khorne roared, a sound that shattered mountains on a dozen nearby daemon worlds. He rose from his throne, gripping his massive sword, ready to destroy this intruder who dared to unmake his servants. But before he could attack, Manhattan spoke. "You are the weakest of the 4, he said simply. "You feed only on direct violence and open conflict. Your sustenance is limited compared to the others. Nurgle feeds on all decay, all entropy, all acceptance of death. Tsiench feeds on every plan and every hope for change. Slaanesh feeds on every excess and every desire. But you only feed on rage and bloodshed. Remove those, and you starve." Khorne charged anyway, because that was all he knew how to do. Manhattan did not fight back. He simply ceased to exist in that location, reappearing instantly on the other side of the brass citadel. Khorne's sword struck empty air. The Chaos God turned and charged again. Again, Manhattan relocated without effort. The pattern repeated, Khorne attacking nothing, while Manhattan observed with clinical detachment. Finally, Manhattan spoke again. "You cannot harm me. Violence requires a victim, and I cannot be victimized. I exist outside the framework that gives your violence meaning." He left Khorne's realm, the Chaos God still raging impotently behind him. Manhattan had learned what he needed to know about the 4 primary chaos entities. They were powerful, certainly, but only within specific contexts. Remove those contexts, and they became irrelevant. They were not truly gods in any meaningful sense. They were reflections, echoes of mortal, emotion amplified through the warp. They had no existence independent of the beings who fed them. Manhattan returned to normal space, materializing above a dead world on the edge of the Eye of Terror. Below him, The planet was lifeless, its atmosphere stripped away by ancient wars. He stood in the void, not needing air or warmth, contemplating what he had learned. A psychic message reached him, powerful enough to cross the gulf between real space and the warp. It came from Terra, from the Emperor of Mankind himself. The message carried weight, transmitted through quantum channels that Manhattan could respect if not admire. The Emperor's consciousness operated on principles similar to Manhattan's own, existing partially outside normal time, perceiving multiple futures simultaneously. The message was simple: an offer of alliance, a request for aid. The Emperor had witnessed Manhattan's power and recognized its potential. Together, they could reshape the galaxy, remake humanity into something that could survive without the constant horror and sacrifice. They could bring order to chaos, light to darkness. Manhattan considered the offer for exactly 1 nanosecond, which from his perspective was more than enough time to examine every possible timeline where he accepted. He saw the outcomes clearly. In some, humanity flourished briefly before collapsing. In others, his intervention caused cascades of unintended consequences that led to extinction. In the majority of timelines, his help accomplished nothing meaningful, merely delaying the inevitable. He crafted a response and sent it back through the quantum channel. "You are dying. Your Imperium is already dead. I see its corpse. Why should I preserve an inevitability?" The Emperor's reply came instantly, carrying emotion that Manhattan had not expected: desperation, hope, neither of which moved Manhattan in the slightest. The Emperor argued that the future could be changed, that nothing was truly inevitable, that free will existed and could alter any outcome. Manhattan knew better. He had seen enough universes to understand that free will was an illusion created by insufficient data. Given complete information about all variables, all outcomes became predictable. The Emperor's struggle, humanity's war against chaos, the eventual fall of the Imperium, all were determined by factors already in motion. Manhattan's intervention would not change the fundamental nature of this reality. As he prepared to continue his observations elsewhere in the galaxy, Manhattan detected something unexpected. A presence that surprised him, which was itself noteworthy. He had not been surprised by anything in decades. The presence was vast, distributed across light years of space, operating on principles that reminded him of his own consciousness. The Tyranid hive mind had noticed him, and it was attempting communication. Manhattan turned his attention toward the approaching hive fleets. Curious about this development, here was something truly alien, something that might provide data worth collecting. He decided to establish direct contact, to link his consciousness with the hive mind and understand its nature. He did not consider the consequences of such an action. Consequences were irrelevant when he existed in all timelines simultaneously. He reached out with his mind, establishing a quantum link with the Gestalt consciousness of the Tyranid swarm. For one instant, two godlike entities touched, their thoughts merging across impossible distances. The hive mind recoiled, overwhelmed by contact with a consciousness that existed in dimensions it could not process. Manhattan pulled back, severing the connection, but the damage was done. Across a dozen star systems, hive fleets suddenly went silent. The psychic link that bound millions of Tyranid organisms into a single consciousness shattered like glass. Individual creatures, suddenly cut off from the guiding intelligence that gave them purpose, stopped in confusion. Swarm ships drifted without direction. Warriors that had been advancing on Imperial worlds stood motionless, their minds empty. Manhattan observed the results of his experiment with interest. He had not intended to damage the hive mind, merely to understand it. But the contact had been too much, too alien, too fundamentally incompatible. The hive mind had fractured, splitting into isolated fragments that could no longer communicate. Trillions of Tyranid organisms were now stranded, cut off from the collective consciousness that defined their existence. He noted the outcome and moved on, already forgetting about the hive fleets he had accidentally crippled. They were data points, nothing more. The suffering of countless organisms meant nothing to him. Suffering was simply a chemical reaction, an evolutionary response to damage. It had no moral weight, no significance beyond its existence as an observable phenomenon. Dr. Manhattan continued his journey through the galaxy, studying its inhabitants like insects pinned to display boards. And everywhere he went, His mere presence destabilized the careful balance between order and chaos, between survival and extinction. But he did not notice, and would not have cared if he had. Dr. Manhattan selected a world for his experiment with the same detachment a scientist might choose a petri dish. Meridian Prime was an imperial world of moderate importance, home to 12 billion citizens spread across 3 continents. It manufactured weapons for the Imperial Guard, produced food for nearby hive worlds, and tithed its children to serve in the Astra Militarum. For 3,000 years, Meridian Prime had followed this pattern, sending its resources and lives to feed the endless hunger of the Imperium. Its citizens lived in moderate poverty, worked until their bodies failed, and died believing their suffering served the Emperor's grand design. The planet was also at war. Chaos cultists had infiltrated the government decades ago, spreading corruption through whispered promises and forbidden knowledge. Now open rebellion consumed the southern continent. Traitor Guard regiments fought loyal Imperial forces across burning cities. Daemons manifested in the shadows, feeding on the fear and despair of civilians caught between armies. Orbital bombardment had turned entire regions into radioactive wastelands. The death count had reached 200 million and climbed higher each day. Manhattan descended through the atmosphere, observing the conflict with clinical interest. He saw soldiers on both sides, dying in identical ways. Shot through the chest or blown apart by artillery, their final moments indistinguishable except for the symbols on their uniforms. He saw children starving in refugee camps while food rotted in warehouses because supply chains had collapsed. He saw psychers being executed by inquisitorial forces to prevent daemon possession, their screams identical to those of the daemons being banished. The pattern was inefficient. Resources were being destroyed rather than utilized. Population was being reduced through violence rather than balanced through managed reproduction. The planet would take centuries to recover from this conflict, if it recovered at all. Manhattan decided to correct these inefficiencies. He raised both hands, his blue form glowing brighter than the sun. Across the entire planet, every trace of war presence simply ceased to exist. Daemons evaporated mid-stride, their forms unable to maintain coherence without the energies that sustained them. Chaos cultists found the voices in their heads suddenly silent, the promises of dark gods replaced by empty confusion. Psychers felt their powers drain away, becoming normal humans in the span of a heartbeat. Even the chaos, corruption that had seeped into the planet's soil and water vanished, matter returning to its uncorrupted state. Then, Manhattan surrounded the entire world in a quantum barrier. It was invisible, undetectable by any Imperial sensor, but absolutely impenetrable. Nothing could pass through it. No warp travel, no astropathic communication, no daemon manifestation. Meridian Prime was completely isolated from the rest of the galaxy. A bubble of normal space, protected from all external influence. The fighting stopped immediately. Traitor guardsmen blinked in confusion, unable to remember why they had been killing their former comrades. The chaos symbols painted on their armor faded away. The mutations that had twisted their bodies reversed themselves. They looked at the corpses around them and felt only horror at what they had done. Manhattan descended to the planetary capital, a city of 30 million that had been reduced to ruins by weeks of urban warfare. He walked through streets filled with rubble and bodies, past collapsed buildings and burning vehicles. Survivors huddled in basements and shelters, too afraid to emerge, waiting for the next artillery strike or daemon attack that would never come. He began to rebuild. With a thought, he reversed time for the physical structures, while leaving the people untouched. Buildings uncollapsed, rising from their own rubble. Streets reformed, cracks sealing themselves. Water, mains and power lines reconnected. The city reconstructed itself in minutes, returning to the state it had been in before the war began. The dead remained dead, but their bodies vanished. Their matter converted into useful materials and distributed throughout the city's restored infrastructure. Manhattan appeared on every screen, every Vox speaker, every communication device on the planet simultaneously. His blue face looked out at 12 billion frightened people. His voice, emotionless and clear, reached every ear. I am Dr. Manhattan. This world is now under my protection. All conflict will cease. All weapons will be deactivated. I will provide food, shelter, and medical care for all inhabitants. Chaos, corruption has been removed. The warp can no longer touch this world. You are safe. In the Imperial command bunker, Lord General Constantine stared at the screens, showing his soldiers laying down their weapons. The Chaos Rebellion had ended instantly. The daemons were gone. The planet had been healed. He should have felt relief, gratitude, joy. Instead, he felt terror. "Get me a signal to Terra," he ordered his communications officer. "Emergency priority. The Emperor must know about this immediately." The officer tried every channel, every frequency, every possible method of interstellar communication. Nothing worked. The astropaths reported that they could no longer touch the warp, could not send their thoughts beyond the planet's atmosphere. Meridian Prime had been cut off completely from the Imperium. "My lord," the officer reported, his voice shaking, "we cannot reach anyone. It is as if the rest of the galaxy has ceased to exist." Constantine closed his eyes. He understood what had happened. The blue entity had not saved them. It had imprisoned them, and there was nothing any force in the Imperium could do about it. Manhattan spent the following weeks reshaping Meridian Prime's civilization. He eliminated poverty by restructuring the economy. Resources were distributed based on need rather than political influence or social status. Food production was optimized through improved agriculture techniques that he simply programmed into farming equipment. Manufacturing became more efficient, producing exactly what was needed without waste. Medical technology advanced overnight as Manhattan shared knowledge of human biology that the Imperium had lost or never possessed. Within a month, no one on Meridian Prime went hungry. Within 2 months, disease had been nearly eliminated. Within 3 months, the concept of social class began to break down as everyone had access to the same resources and opportunities. The planet transformed from a war-torn imperial world into something resembling paradise by comparison. Manhattan watched the results of his experiment from orbit, observing the population's behavior. He expected improvement in all measurable metrics. Quality of life would increase. Infant mortality would drop. Life expectancy would rise. Creativity and innovation would flourish without the burden of survival consuming all energy and attention. The citizens of Meridian Prime would become an example of what humanity could achieve without the Imperium's cruelty and inefficiency. But something unexpected began to happen. The people of Meridian Prime started to lose purpose. For 3,000 years, they had been told their suffering mattered. Every hardship they endured served the Emperor's grand plan. Every child they sent to war died protecting humanity from forces that wanted to destroy it. The misery had meaning, even if that meaning was terrible. Now the meaning was gone. Manhattan had removed not just the suffering, but the framework that made suffering comprehensible. Citizens completed their work assignments, but felt no satisfaction. They spent their free time in entertainment, but found no joy. They lived in comfort, but experienced no contentment. Something fundamental had been stripped away, along with the hardship. Lord General Constantine saw it happening first among his soldiers. Warriors who had fought for decades, who had defined themselves through service and sacrifice, now wandered through the rebuilt city with empty expressions. They trained out of habit but no longer understood why. Some began to request weapons to restart the war, not because they wanted to serve chaos, but because they needed struggle to feel alive. The general requested an audience with Manhattan. To his surprise, the blue entity appeared in his office within seconds, standing by the window overlooking the city. "What have you done to us?" Constantine asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Manhattan turned to look at him, those glowing eyes showing no emotion. "I removed the sources of your suffering. I provided abundance where there was scarcity. I eliminated the conflict that was destroying your civilization. By all measurable standards, conditions have improved significantly. Then why do my people look dead inside?" Constantine demanded. "Why do they wander through your perfect city like ghosts? Why do parents stare at their children without joy? Why do artists create nothing? Why do we wake each day feeling like something essential has been torn away?" Manhattan considered the question for exactly 3 seconds, which was longer than he typically spent on such matters. Humanity requires adversity to maintain coherence. Without external pressure, social structures become unstable. Without struggle, individual purpose becomes undefined. Your species evolved in environments of constant challenge. Remove those challenges, and psychological entropy increases. Constantine slammed his fist on his desk. "We are not experiments! We are people. Whatever you think you have done for us, you have taken something away that we need more than food or safety. You have stolen our ability to matter. Mattering is a subjective value judgment without objective meaning. Manhattan replied, Your species assigns importance to struggle because natural selection favored individuals who found meaning in adversity. This is merely an evolutionary adaptation, not a fundamental truth. Then you understand nothing about what makes us human, Constantine said quietly. Manhattan did not respond. He simply vanished, leaving the Lord General alone with his perfect, meaningless world. Across the galaxy, the Imperium became aware of Meridian Prime's situation. Long-range sensors detected the quantum barrier around the planet. Ships that tried to approach found themselves unable to enter the system, turned away by forces they could not comprehend. Astropaths received no messages from the 12 billion souls trapped inside. It was as if an entire world had been erased from existence while remaining physically present. An emergency conclave gathered on Terra, in the shadowed halls of the Imperial Palace. Representatives from every major Imperial organization attended. Chapter Masters of Space, Marine Chapters, High Inquisitors, Fabricator Generals of the Adeptus Mechanicus, Lord Commanders of the Imperial Navy, Ecclesiarchs of the Ministorum. They came to discuss the threat that called itself Dr. Manhattan. Chapter Master Valdor of the Silver Templars argued for immediate military action. This entity has demonstrated hostility toward the Imperium. It has stolen one of our worlds and imprisoned our citizens. We must respond with overwhelming force. Deploy battle barges. Bombard the quantum barrier until it fails. Show this abomination that humanity does not yield to any threat, no matter how powerful. High Inquisitor Markov disagreed. We do not even understand what this being is. Our weapons had no effect when it appeared at Cadia. It walked through the Eye of Terror and returned unharmed. It crippled multiple hive fleets with a thought. What makes you believe our battle barges would accomplish anything except revealing our own weakness? From the shadows came a voice that caused all present to fall silent. A golden light grew in the chamber, not from any physical source, but from the psychic presence of the Emperor himself, projecting his will through the assembled leaders. When he spoke, it was not through words, but through impressions directly in their minds. The Emperor had been watching Manhattan since his arrival. He had witnessed the entity's journey through the realms of chaos. He had observed the destruction of the Tyranid hive mind's connection. He had seen the transformation of Meridian Prime. And he had reached a conclusion that terrified even him. Manhattan was not hostile. Hostility implied emotion, intention, care about outcomes. Manhattan was indifferent, which was far more dangerous. He possessed power that rivaled the Chaos Gods themselves, but operated without any moral framework that could be predicted or appealed to. He could not be threatened, could not be manipulated, could not be reasoned with through any argument based on emotion or ethics. The Emperor's presence conveyed a command to Markov. Contact the entity. Attempt negotiation one final time. Offer anything. Promise everything. But make it understand that Meridian Prime must be returned to the Imperium. The citizens trapped there needed their suffering back. They needed their purpose. They needed the Imperium, with all its cruelty, because that cruelty was what made their lives comprehensible. Markov bowed to the golden light. It will be done, my Emperor. Meanwhile, on Meridian Prime, the paradise continued to decay. Not physically. The cities remained pristine, the resources abundant, the technology advanced, but the people themselves were falling apart. Suicide rates climbed daily. Citizens threw themselves from buildings not because they were unhappy, but because they felt nothing at all and hoped dying might make them feel something. Parents abandoned their children, unable to generate the emotional energy needed for care. Couples stopped speaking to each other, their relationship sustained by nothing now that survival was no longer a shared struggle. Lord General Constantine watched his world die slowly from the inside. The war had killed 200 million in months. Manhattan's peace would kill 12 billion in years, not through violence, but through the gradual erosion of everything that made life worth living. He found Manhattan standing in the central plaza of the capital, surrounded by citizens who simply sat on benches or stood in place, doing nothing, feeling nothing, being nothing. You have to let us go, Constantine said. This experiment has failed. Your paradise is killing us more thoroughly than any war could have. Manhattan looked at the empty faces around him. He analyzed their brain chemistry, their neural patterns, their behavioral markers. Constantine was correct. By every psychological measure, the population was deteriorating. Depression, anxiety, dissociation, conditions that should have decreased with improved living standards were instead increasing exponentially. I provided optimal conditions for survival and growth, Manhattan stated. The failure is in your species, not in the environment I created. Then we are a failed species by your standards, Constantine replied. But we are what we are. We need struggle to survive, even if that seems illogical to you. We need the Imperium, with all its horror, because that horror gives us meaning. Your perfect world has no meaning, and meaning matters more to us than perfection. For the first time since arriving in this universe, Manhattan encountered a concept he had not fully considered. Meaning was not measurable. It was not quantifiable. It existed only as a subjective experience within conscious minds. By any objective standard, meaning should not matter. Yet for humans, it apparently mattered more than physical well-being, more than safety, more than survival itself. He had destroyed these people by saving them. The irony was not lost on him, though it generated no emotional response. Before he could reply to Constantine, reality rippled around him. A psychic message arrived, stronger than the Emperor's previous communication. High Inquisitor Markov spoke through a projection that manifested in the plaza, her image flickering with strain from the effort of breaching the quantum barrier even temporarily. "Dr. Manhattan," she said, her voice carrying the authority of the Inquisition and the weight of the Emperor's will behind it. "You have taken Meridian Prime from the Imperium. We request its return. Name your price. We will pay anything within our power to give. The Emperor himself offers to meet with you personally, to explain why these people need what you have taken from them." Manhattan considered the offer. Meeting with the Emperor might provide interesting data. The ruler of humanity possessed psychic abilities that operated on quantum principles. A direct conversation could yield insights into how consciousness interacted with the warp at fundamental levels. "I will meet with your Emperor," Manhattan said, "but not to negotiate. I do not require anything from the Imperium. I will come to understand why this experiment failed. Your species fascinates me in ways I did not anticipate." Markov's projection nodded and vanished. Manhattan prepared to leave Meridian Prime, to travel to Terra and speak with the one being in this universe who might approach his level of perception. But first, he looked at Lord General Constantine one more time. "I will remove the barrier before I depart," Manhattan said. "Your people will be free to rejoin the Imperium. They can return to their suffering and their meaning. I have learned what I needed to learn from this observation." Constantine felt a wave of relief, so intense it nearly drove him to his knees. "Thank you," he whispered. "Do not thank me," Manhattan replied. "I am not doing this out of compassion. Compassion is an 80 emotional response I am not capable of experiencing. I am simply terminating a failed experiment. The data collected is sufficient." With those words, the quantum barrier dissolved. The warp rushed back into the space around Meridian Prime. Astropaths screamed as psychic channels reopened. Ships in orbit detected the change immediately and began transmitting to Terra. After 3 months of isolation, Meridian Prime had been returned to the galaxy. Manhattan vanished without another word, leaving behind a world that was both saved and scarred. The people of Meridian Prime would spend years recovering from their time in paradise, learning how to find meaning again in struggle and suffering. Some never would. But most would eventually return to their place in the Imperium, grateful for the cruelty that gave their lives purpose. Dr. Manhattan reappeared in orbit around Terra, that ancient throne world of humanity. Below him lay the birthplace of the species he was trying to understand. Soon he would meet their Emperor and perhaps finally comprehend why beings with such power chose to make themselves suffer. The answer, he suspected, would be found not in logic or reason, but in something far less quantifiable. Something he had lost long ago, when he had become more than human. Dr. Manhattan descended through Terra's atmosphere, passing through defense networks that would have atomized any unauthorized vessel. Orbital weapons platforms tracked his movement but did not fire. The Adeptus Custodes, golden guardians of the Imperial Palace, watched his approach through ancient sensors and simply opened the gates. The Emperor had commanded that the blue entity be allowed to enter without challenge or delay. The Imperial Palace sprawled across an entire continent, a structure so vast that cities existed within its walls. Billions of pilgrims walked its outer halls, praying to the emperor they would never see. Millions of soldiers stood guard along battlements that stretched beyond the horizon. Thousands of administrators worked in chambers dedicated to managing single aspects of the Imperium's infinite bureaucracy. The palace was not merely a building, but a monument to humanity's desperate grandeur, a physical manifestation of the species' refusal to surrender, despite 10,000 years of unending war. Manhattan walked through golden corridors lined with statues of Space Marine primarchs, each 100 feet tall, carved from marble and adorned with precious metals. He saw their histories without needing to read any inscriptions. Robut Guillemon, the logistician who had tried to bring order to chaos. Sanguinius, the angel who had died defending his father. Rogel Dorn, the fortress builder who had turned defense into an art form. And the traitors, too. Their statues toppled and defaced but still present. Horus and his brothers, who had nearly destroyed everything their father had built. Custodians watched him pass, their guardian spears humming with power fields. These were the Emperor's personal guards, warriors who could match Space Marines in single combat and surpass them in discipline and loyalty. Each one had trained for decades before being deemed worthy of their golden armor. Each one would die without hesitation to protect the man they served. Manhattan observed their dedication with clinical interest, noting the neurological patterns that sustained such absolute loyalty. He walked for what seemed like hours, though distance and time held little meaning for him. Eventually, he reached the throne room's massive doors, adamantium plates, 30 feet thick, inscribed with wards and prayers in languages older than the Imperium itself. The doors opened silently despite their tremendous weight, revealing a chamber so large its far walls disappeared into shadow. At the chamber's center sat the Golden Throne, a construct of technology and psychic architecture built during humanity's lost golden age. Upon it sat what remained of the Emperor of mankind. His physical body had withered to a corpse over 10,000 years of continuous suffering. Tubes and cables connected to desiccated flesh, feeding nutrients to organs that should have failed millennia ago. Machines hummed and clicked, maintaining the impossible balance between life and death that kept his consciousness active. But the Emperor's psychic presence filled the chamber like invisible fire. Manhattan could perceive it across multiple dimensions, a consciousness vast enough to guide humanity across the galaxy, powerful enough to hold back the forces of chaos through sheer will. The Emperor existed partially outside of time. His awareness spread across past and future, seeing possibilities and probabilities in ways that approached Manhattan's own perception. Manhattan stood before the throne, looking up at the withered form of humanity's protector. For a long moment, neither being spoke. They simply observed each other, two entities whose existence defied normal physical laws, whose perspectives encompassed timescales beyond mortal comprehension. Then the Emperor's voice filled Manhattan's mind, not through sound, but through direct psychic communication. It carried weight and authority, but also something Manhattan had not expected: wariness beyond measure. Pain that had lasted for 100 centuries. And beneath it all, a stubborn refusal to surrender that defined the Emperor's entire existence. You have seen my Imperium. The Emperor's presence communicated. You have witnessed its cruelty and its sacrifice. You have observed how we survive through means you find distasteful. I know your judgment before you speak it. I have seen your thoughts, Manhattan replied, his own consciousness projecting directly into the Emperor's mind. I do not judge. Judgment requires moral framework. I observe only that your methods are inefficient and cause unnecessary suffering. Your Imperium sustains itself through constant crisis and deliberate hardship. This seems counterproductive to survival. You understand nothing, the Emperor responded, and his psychic voice carried not anger, but something closer to pity. You possess power beyond measure, yet lack the wisdom to wield it. You can see all possible futures, but cannot comprehend why beings might choose suffering over peace. Let me show you what you cannot perceive through observation alone. Before Manhattan could respond, the Emperor's consciousness reached out and touched his mind. It was not an attack or an attempt at control. It was simply communication at a depth Manhattan had not experienced since his transformation. The Emperor showed him not facts or data, but experience, memory, feeling. Manhattan saw the Emperor's past. He witnessed the being's birth 40,000 years ago, when humanity still lived in caves and hunted with stone tools. He saw this ancient man, this perpetual who did not age or die, watching human civilizations rise and fall across millennia. He felt the Emperor's hope as he guided humanity through the shadows. His despair as wars and disasters set progress back centuries, his determination to eventually create a species that could survive the hostile galaxy. Then came the Great Crusade, the Emperor's attempt to unite humanity under a single banner after the age of strife had left the species scattered and vulnerable. Manhattan saw the creation of the Primarchs, the Emperor's gene-forged sons, each one designed to embody an aspect of perfect leadership. He felt the Emperor's pride as they conquered world after world, bringing lost human colonies back into the fold. Then, betrayal. Horus, the most beloved son, corrupted by the Chaos Gods. Half the Primarchs turning traitor. The siege of Terra. Billions dying as father fought son. The Emperor felt each death, each betrayal, cutting deeper than any blade. When he finally struck down Horus, destroying his own beloved child to save humanity, the pain nearly broke even his ancient mind. And then, the throne. The Emperor's body mortally wounded, his life sustained only by the Golden Throne's ancient mechanisms. 10,000 years of continuous agony, every second of every day, burning with pain that would drive any mortal insane within minutes. But he endured because humanity needed him. The Astronomicon, the psychic lighthouse that made space travel possible, required his constant attention. Without it, the Imperium would fragment into isolated worlds, easy prey for the Chaos Gods, the Tyranids, and countless other threats. Manhattan experienced 10,000 years of suffering compressed into moments. He felt the weight of 1,000 choices where every option led to horror, and the Emperor had to choose which horror was least terrible. Send 1 billion soldiers to die stopping a chaos incursion, or allow 1 trillion civilians to be corrupted. Exterminate a planet infected by genostealers, or risk the Tyranid fleet consuming an entire sector. Execute psychers who might become daemon gateways, or gamble that they could be trained safely. Every day, every hour, the Emperor made choices that killed millions. And every death weighed on him, adding to the burden he had carried for 400 centuries. The cruelty of the Imperium was not cruelty for its own sake. It was the minimum amount of horror required to prevent humanity's complete extinction. The vision ended, and Manhattan found himself still standing before the Golden Throne. For the first time since his transformation, he experienced something that approached understanding, not agreement, not approval, but comprehension of a perspective he had dismissed as simply inefficient. "You could save us." The Emperor's voice came again, quieter now, almost pleading. "You possess the power to remake the Imperium into what I dreamed it could be. You could remove chaos from the galaxy. You could destroy the Tyranids before they arrive in force. You could eliminate every threat that forces us to choose between survival and morality. I am asking you, not as a ruler, but as a being who has carried this burden for longer than you have existed. Help us." Manhattan considered this request. He examined every possible timeline where he intervened as the Emperor asked. He saw the round outcomes clearly across thousands of probability branches. In 94% of those futures, his intervention caused humanity's extinction within 1 century. The species, freed from external pressure, turned on itself. Without common enemies, the Imperium fractured into civil wars. Without the constant threat of annihilation, the unity of purpose that held humanity together dissolved. In the timelines where humanity survived his intervention, it was only because new threats emerged to replace the old ones. The universe itself seemed to generate challenges to fill any vacuum Manhattan created. Remove chaos, and something worse manifested from the deep warp. Destroy the Tyranids, and mechanical horrors from beyond the galaxy arrived. Humanity required adversity the way plants required sunlight. Remove it, and they withered. "I have examined all outcomes," Manhattan finally responded. "In 94% of timelines where I provide the assistance you request, humanity goes extinct within 100 years. Your species needs the suffering you experience. It is not a problem to solve, but a condition of your survival. My intervention would eliminate the evolutionary pressure that keeps humanity coherent." The Emperor's presence dimmed slightly, as if he had expected this answer but hoped it might be different. Then you condemn us to endless war, endless sacrifice, endless horror. I condemn nothing, Manhattan said. I simply observe what is. Your universe operates on different principles than the one I came from. In my reality, hope was a virtue that led to positive outcomes. Here, hope is a mutation that provides temporary comfort before inevitable defeat. In my reality, compassion strengthened communities. Here, compassion is a weakness that chaos exploits. Your Emperor's cruelty is the only form of compassion this reality permits. And you see no alternative? The Emperor asked. No possibility where humanity might escape this cycle? Manhattan paused before responding. In his perception, he could see the ultimate fate of the Imperium clearly. In 3,847 years, the Golden Throne would finally fail. The Emperor's body would die completely, his consciousness dispersing into the warp. Terra would burn, the Imperium would shatter, humanity would face extinction. But in some of those futures, something unexpected happened. From the Emperor's death, something new was born. A human god, formed from 10,000 years of worship and sacrifice, emerging from the warp itself. This new entity would not save humanity in any conventional sense, but it would give them something to fight for. As they descended into their final wars, it would provide meaning in the face of inevitable doom. There is no escape, Manhattan said finally. Only transformation. Your death will come, as will the Imperium's. But death here is not an ending. It is a transition into something else, something I cannot fully predict, because it operates on principles outside my experience. The Emperor absorbed this information without visible reaction. He had known this truth for millennia, but hearing it confirmed by a being of Manhattan's perception gave it a terrible finality. Then, I have one final request, the Emperor said. Not for intervention, not for salvation, simply witness. When the end comes, when the throne fails, and Terra burns, I ask that you observe what follows. Record it with your perfect memory, so that someone, somewhere, will know that humanity existed and what we achieved despite the darkness. Manhattan considered this request. It required nothing from him except passive observation, which he would likely do anyway. But the Emperor was asking not just for observation, but for remembrance. For his species' story to matter to someone, even if that someone was an entity incapable of caring. I will observe, Manhattan agreed. I will remember. But know that memory is all I can offer. I cannot make your species' existence meaningful. Meaning is something conscious beings create internally. It cannot be imposed from outside. Then memory will be enough, the Emperor replied. Thank you, Dr. Manhattan. Manhattan turned to leave the throne room. As he walked back through the golden corridors, past the statues of Primarchs and the custodians standing eternal vigil, he reflected on what he had learned in this universe. The Imperium was horrific by any reasonable standard. It was cruel, oppressive, wasteful of life. It ground trillions of humans into dust to sustain itself. And yet, it was also the only system that allowed humanity to survive in a galaxy that wanted nothing more than to exterminate them completely. In his home reality, Manhattan had often felt disconnected from humanity because his power separated him from their struggles. Here, he felt disconnected for a different reason. These humans struggled in ways he could not relate to, choosing suffering because the alternative was extinction. They created meaning out of horror because horror was all their reality offered. They worshipped a corpse on a throne because that corpse was the only thing standing between them and oblivion. Manhattan materialized above Cadia once more, returning to where his journey in this universe had begun. Below him, the 13th Black Crusade continued. Imperial forces battled chaos fleets in the void. On the planet's surface, soldiers died by the thousands, defending fortifications against traitor space marines and daemon hordes. The war that had paused when he first arrived had resumed as if he had never been there at all. He raised one hand and pointed at a single Chaos warship, a cruiser attacking a cluster of orbital defense platforms. The vessel exploded, its atomic structure destabilized at the quantum level. Not because Manhattan cared about the Imperium's survival, not because he opposed chaos, simply because the molecular patterns had been unstable and correcting them interested him momentarily. The explosion killed 3,000 traitor space marines and destroyed a ship that had terrorized Imperial space for 500 years. But it changed nothing. Another vessel moved to take its place. The war continued. Cadia would still fall, though Manhattan could delay that outcome if he chose. He did not choose. The fall of Cadia was a fixed point in this timeline, necessary for events that would unfold across the next millennia. Manhattan prepared to leave this universe. His observations were complete. He had learned what he needed to understand about how consciousness operated in a reality where gods existed and fed on emotion. The data would be useful if he ever encountered similar phenomena in other dimensions. But before he departed, he crafted one final communication and sent it to Inquisitor Kylar on Cadia's surface, the man who had been aged 40 years by witnessing Terra's future ruins. The man who had asked what manner of day being Manhattan was and received an answer that terrified him. The message was simple. I understand now. Your universe operates on different principles than mine. Hope here is not a virtue, but a mutation that provides comfort before defeat. Compassion here is not strength, but weakness that chaos exploits. Your Emperor's cruelty is the only compassion this reality permits. I return to my own universe, where I remain equally powerless to change what must be, but at least the suffering there has the dignity of pretending meaning exists. Goodbye, Inquisitor. I will remember your species when it is gone. Kylar received the message on his data slate as he coordinated defensive positions against an incoming daemon assault. He read it once, then deleted it without comment. The words offered no comfort, no hope, no possibility of salvation. They simply confirmed what every Imperial citizen learned from birth. The universe was hostile. Survival required sacrifice. Meaning had to be created from horror, because horror was humanity's natural state. He returned to his duties, ordering soldiers to positions where they would likely die, making choices that would save thousands by sacrificing hundreds. The calculations that Manhattan had found so fascinating were Kylar's daily reality. And unlike Manhattan, Kylar felt the weight of every death, carried the burden of every choice. That was what made him human. That was what Manhattan could never understand. Dr. Manhattan vanished from the Warhammer universe as suddenly as he had arrived. Reality sealed behind him, the dimensional breach closing. In another universe, on Mars, he materialized and looked down at Earth. His Earth. The planet he had left behind to wander through other realities, seeking understanding of consciousness and existence. He had found something in the dark universe. Not answers, exactly, but perspective. In his home reality, his power had made him feel separated from humanity. In Warhammer, he had encountered humans who were separated from hope, from peace, from everything that made life comfortable, yet they persisted anyway. They created meaning out of suffering, because the alternative was surrendering to extinction. Manhattan could not change what must be in any universe. His power, vast as it was, could not alter the fundamental nature of reality itself. In his universe, entropy would eventually claim everything. In the Emperor's universe, chaos would eventually consume humanity. These were not problems with solutions. They were simply the conditions of existence in their respective realities. Nothing ever ends, Manhattan said to himself, his voice carrying across the Martian wasteland. Not even in universes where everything should. He thought of the Emperor on his golden throne, burning in agony for 10,000 years to give his species a few more centuries of existence. He thought of Lord General Constantine, grateful to return to a life of suffering because suffering gave him purpose. He thought of Inquisitor Kylar, making terrible choices every day and carrying their weight because someone had to. These humans, in their dying Imperium, had shown Manhattan something his own detachment had blinded him to. Power without purpose was meaningless. Knowledge without wisdom was useless. The ability to see all outcomes meant nothing if you could not choose which outcome to create. And choice required caring about the consequences, something Manhattan had lost when he became more than human. He could not become human again. That transformation was irreversible, but he could remember what he had witnessed. He could carry the memory of a species that refused to surrender, despite knowing their eventual defeat was inevitable. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps memory and witness were the only forms of meaning available to beings like him. Far across the multiverse, in a universe of endless war and darkness, the Imperium of Man continued its 10,000-year struggle. The Emperor burned on his throne. Soldiers died in trenches. Inquisitors made choices that damned thousands to save millions. The Chaos Gods schemed in the warp. The Tyranids approached from beyond the galactic rim, and humanity endured, not because they had hope of ultimate victory, but because surrender was unthinkable. Dr. Manhattan had visited their universe and departed without changing anything. His power, which could remake worlds and cripple hive minds, had proven meaningless against the fundamental nature of their reality. He had been a blue god who descended from the void, observed their suffering and left them to it. And in the grim darkness of the far future, where there was only war, that was somehow the most honest thing anyone could have done.